Everyone hits a bump in the road. What do you do with it? Be inspired as we explore the ways people experience, navigate, and manage the ups and downs and twists and turns in this road trip called life. Randy Martinez is a man making a difference in the world. From his work with nonprofits to his role in corporate America, his mission is to help others. Where does this drive come from? Well, 30 years ago, Randy had a life-altering experience, and this is the first time he is sharing his story. Randy, welcome to Bump in the Road. Give us a little bit of background on your story.
Sure. Sure. So, like I just mentioned, I've never, I don't talk about this. It's been over 30 years since I was diagnosed with cancer, and I don't mention it to people. I don't talk about it. I don't go into detail. It wasn't until last year that I was asked to do a keynote that I did highlight a little bit, or I mentioned that I had cancer and talked about my work at CBS, but I really don't discuss it much after that, outside of that. But it was 30 years ago that I learned that I had cancer, and it's interesting. I'm 50, and I remember when I was about 9 years old watching a movie, and I'll tell you the name of the movie in a second, but it was this one particular scene that really hit me, and I thought about that, through my teenage years, and I never understood why I could never stop thinking about this particular scene in this movie from when I was 9. And it was a man and he was in a bathtub in boiling water, because the pain from cancer was so bad that his family they were pouring boiling water into a bathtub. And, and I remember that they named an elementary school after him in New Mexico. It's John Baker, who was a track star at the University of New Mexico and became this celebrated person, but they did this story about his life in his 20s with cancer. And so that scene really stood out. The name of the movie, A Shining Season, that chronicled John Baker's life. And so I never really understood why I couldn't get that scene off my mind. And so fast forward, and I'm 18 years old. And one night, I just wake up in the middle of the night with this excruciating pain in my testicle. And I remember getting up to go get my parents, and I fell. I just couldn't. My right leg went limp, and I yelled for them, and they came into the room, and I told them I was screaming. And finally, after about a little while, maybe 30 minutes or so, it went away, and I was able to go back to sleep. My father was in the Air Force at the time, and we lived in Virginia. And so the next morning, my mother took me to the Army hospital, and they said, "Hey, you might have an infection, or it might be an embroidal testicle, cutting off circulation. Take some medication and, come back, if things don't change." So we went home, and then the next day, I noticed that the testicle just felt a little harder. And it started to get progressively harder and larger. And I knew there was a problem, but all my friends were home from school, and I just wanted to go out and have fun. It was the Christmas holiday, and, we were all having a great time and catching up. And so about a month went by. And this was, I want to say, late November of 1988 when I went to the Army hospital. And so got through the entire month of December. And on January 9th, the morning of January 9th. I walk in from being out with a bunch of my friends. It was about 2 in the morning, and my mother is sitting at the top of the stairs. And she, I couldn't get to my room without bypassing her. And she said, "You're not telling me something." And I looked at her and I said, what do you mean?" She goes, "I just had a dream that you have cancer." And it's probably why I don't talk about this. And she said, "There's something wrong and you're not telling me." And I said, "Yeah, there is." And I told her, "Mom, the testicle has grown a lot and I can't even really sit down." And she said, "All right, I'm taking you to the doctor first thing in the morning. We're going to go to the Air Force Hospital, Malcolm Grow Medical Center." And we drove there, and I'll never forget. It was like a so it's now the morning of January 9th, and it was this like a 4 hour wait in the emergency room. And so my mom, who is my mom, I always called her a rat. She's going from doctor to doctor, room to room, finding somebody to check me immediately. And they did, and they had me wait, and they called for a urologist out of surgery to come down and take a look at me. And and I remember they were just, they had a student doctor there, and they went through a series of exams, and next thing I know, they're running ultrasounds tests, and I'm in surgery by 2 o'clock that afternoon. Um,
Oh my God.
yeah, and so they removed the testicle, and it was uh, it was about 95% cancer. Had I waited a few more days, it would have started spreading aggressively into my abdominal area, the lymph nodes. Um, One of the weird things about that moment was that my chest started to hurt, the nipple area. And this is something that people don't know, and it's just odd about the human body, is that the levels, I believe testosterone were so high that maybe a couple of more days I would have started discharging from my chest. That's just how intense all this was moving, the how fast and intense it was. Um, Immediately the pain in my chest went away. But they came in that evening and said, you have cancer. And I didn't know how to take that. I didn't know what to do with that information. Um, it was now the evening of January 9th. And, I'm in this room. My parents are a mess. They are in the process of starting a divorce, which complicated things even more. Um, and, uh, and I remember that night, a man came in, and he had a rosary, and I took it, and I took the instructions with the rosary, but I didn't do anything with it. I just kept it. Um, and so then, the doctors came in the next day and said, "You have to begin. We have to begin chemotherapy," and they walked me through what all that meant. Um, And so they started running a series of exams, eye exams, just across the board. And they discovered a retinal hole in my eye. And from years ago, my cousin threw a pen, and I know that's what it was. And it lodged in my eye, and my eye turned red and whatnot. But they needed to fix that because of, me getting sick from chemo. It could break, open that retinal hole even more. So they they did laser operation and had to hold off a couple of weeks on chemo. Real simple laser, just a little procedure there. And then they started to see the numbers going down, my tumor markers. And the doctors at the Air Force Hospital recommended that I hold off and not do chemo, that maybe just wait, for a year and see what happens. And so, we went and got a second opinion at Georgetown Medical Center. They said the same thing. And so I started to wait. Um, I was supposed to be getting CAT scans during that year. I just didn't. I think there might, for me personally, I mean, I was young. I was kind of avoiding all this. I didn't want to deal with it. Um, and I never heard from the doctors to come in and get a CAT scan. So I just didn't. And so an entire year goes by. And one day I'm at work. I worked at a hospital, a local hospital in Northern Virginia, and I noticed there was a lump on my upper thigh, my left thigh. And I remember seeing that, and my gut just dropped. I'm like, this can't be happening again. I can't do this a second time. And so I called my boss and I said, I've got to leave. I drove myself to Malcolm Grow Medical Center again. And I went to the ER. It was a Sunday, and explained everything to them. And they made an emergency appointment with the new urologist the next day. I went in. He couldn't believe that I hadn't had a CAT scan all year. He calls the oncologist, and they get into a huge argument, from what I understood. And so they do an emergency CAT scan the next day. And sure enough, they find another tumor in my abdominal area. It had spread at this point. And so, it was, I'll never forget, it was a 1.5 centimeter tumor near my aorta. And so we started the process of doing biopsies, and I had to do probably one of the most painful things I've ever done in my life, where they had to put a very large, long needle through my intestines to try to get a biopsy out of a 1.5 centimeter tumor. And they failed both times. It was excruciatingly painful. It was beyond painful. And so from there, we just decided that I would go into surgery. And so I had a lymph node dissection, what's called a retroperitoneal lymph node dissection. Never forget, I had to learn how to say that. And they removed about 11 lymph nodes. It was a 9-hour operation. It wasn't until years later that I read the surgery report, which was, like, oh man, that was a tough operation. And then I started chemo after that, and chemo was brutal. Like, that was tough. And so I remember one of the medications, cisplatin. They said, look, you're going to start tasting metal in your mouth. And so I remember one day at dinner, and we were around the table, and I couldn't taste my food because everything tasted like metal. And it was interesting, because when I started the first round of chemo, I tanned, my skin got a little darker. I looked healthy. I looked very healthy. And I thought, wow, this isn't that bad. This looks great. And we're all around the table one day, and I put my head down to put the fork full of food in my mouth, and a lump of hair falls on on my plate. And I just remember my mom, she put her hand over her mouth, and she was just shocked. And I think we were all shocked. And I got up and I went upstairs alone, and just started pulling as much hair off my head as I could. And I couldn't believe how it was just coming off so easy. And suddenly I didn't look healthy. I looked bad. It was horrible. And the next day, my cousin took me to the Air Force barber, and it was packed. And they saw me walk in, and I took my hat off, and they just let me, instead of waiting in line, they just said, "Come on, let's take care of you first." And so that was that experience. And I spent the next several months going through chemo And that's when I started to pray the rosary. Uh, I started, I remember sitting in bed after, all day doses of chemo and not able to move at all, and just enough to move my fingers across the rosary, just begging to just get out of that situation, because the feeling of intense chemo is horrible. You feel the nausea, and you feel so hopeless. And so I would pray the rosary as a way for comfort. Um, and Yeah, and so that's, I got through that. I think what got me through those moments, I've always been an optimistic person. And I even though I had to drop out of school for a little bit, I saw myself doing something good in the world. And, through all that, I just saw something positive. And, my parents were going through a really nasty divorce. This situation was happening. And I remember there was a gentleman in next to me. He was older, retired from the military, probably in his 70s. And he was undergoing chemo and radiation for a cancer that he had in his neck and his throat. And talking to him, and he had given up. And I remember the last conversation I ever had with him, he he was very negative, and I remember saying back to him, we're going to get through this. This is going to be fine. It's tough, but we're going to get through it. Um, and I always thought that way. Uh, and and so, my parents got divorced, and I started my life. I finally graduated college. It wasn't easy. I abused alcohol. I turned to drugs early on. I felt insecure. I didn't know where my life was going, what I wanted to do. I knew I was going to do something. I just didn't know what. And, and so I just started this path forward kind of aimlessly. Uh, and and then from there on out, my life took. I came across and did some incredible things, and met incredible people through this really interesting pivoting journey, um, and, uh, and here I am today.
What is it that some of us can dig deep and really pivot out of this experience? And then the gentleman you were talking about in the hospital just didn't. Is it pure optimism, or is there something more there?
Uh, you know, I I mentioned, he was probably in his 70s, 60s or 70s, retired from the military. He had a probably, I don't know what his life was like, but he had lived a good life. I was 19, I was 18. I was on the other side of the spectrum. I was looking forward, he was looking back. And so for me, I wanted there were things I wanted to do that I believed I needed to do. And so I think he had already felt that he had done those things, right? So it's where we were in our lives, that made for a very interesting series of conversations as we both laid there battling cancer together.
When we were talking earlier, you mentioned you had a very interesting observation, and that is that many people who've been through cancer develop a stronger sense of intuition about things. Where do you think that comes from?
I I think it comes so it's not just battling cancer. It's people who face death. Uh, you're when you the second time The second time I got sick, when I found out the second time, I was very scared at first. I thought, I'm not going to make it. This is serious now, because I had a year to understand cancer, to read about it, the different types of cancer, how it impacts people, people's lives and family members. And so, uh, learning put more fear into me than anything. And then here I find myself going, battling this a second time. And so it forces you, when you're facing that, it forces you to dig deep into yourself, into your soul, to figure out, how am I going to battle this? Like, how am I going to fight this, right? You get in a situation where somebody is threatening your life. You're quickly trying to figure out, can I run fast? Can I dodge the, what, the bullet, knife, whatever it may be, the punch, what are the, and so you have to do that with yourself, and you have a lot of time to think about everything you are, everything you do, the way you react to things, why you react to things. You just do this deep, deep dive into your soul. And and you have a lot of time to do that. And so you develop this intuition, and then you see people act a certain way, and you think about yourself when you were in that moment, right? And so it elevates a certain level of understanding about the human condition when you're faced with death, that most people just take for granted on a day-to-day basis. And so I've come across a lot of people that will say, "Oh, I'm intuitive," and I'll ask them what that means, and I'll find out, the more I talk to them, that they've had death at their doorstep in one way or another.
It greatly, excuse me, increases your empathy because you realize everybody is fighting something.
That's right. That's right. That's exactly right. It does increase your empathy, which is what led me to do what I do today. I graduated college, and I started doing nonprofit work. I went out into the world saying, I'm going to change the world. I want to help other people. I want to, I marched in front of the White House for increased representation of Latinos in Congress at the time. I was marching, I rioted, I wanted to make a difference. I started working for a nonprofit organization. Um, and and so that's how my career started. And I ended up, I'm in corporate America today, and I work for a big company. But the work I do inside that company is to help other people succeed and be the best they can. And so I get to do that, to help other people. And so I've always stayed true to that from the beginning. Whether it was from a nonprofit perspective or from a for-profit perspective. And so I've been lucky in that way.
If you could rewrite your story, would you?
No, nope. I I don't. This is the first time I've ever talked about this the way I am, uh, and that's a great question. And my answer to you is absolutely not. It it comforts me to know that I can that I went through that that I went through that that I went through life, and have not just, school knowledge, but a deep sense of understanding of human knowledge, what humanness is. And I love that. I love to know that I can take a step back and understand humanness. And I don't take that for granted. And so I wouldn't rewrite any of it. Let me tell you, Pat, life has not been easy. Where I am, how I got to where I am today, and how I'm still here is just amazing to me, because I've had multiple bumps in the road throughout my life. I have challenges that stem from, those times, that from that experience. I mean, 30 years, I've never really talked about this until today. And I think this is going to do something for me later today and tomorrow and moving forward, having discussed this. And so I wouldn't change it.
If you could give some advice to somebody facing a bump in the road, two or three or four things, how would you advise them?
Oh, geez. I mean, one, you know, find, find, find that thing in you that makes you excited about being you and what you're going to do tomorrow. Find that, be optimistic. Know that tomorrow is just going to be so much more different than today and so much better. Um, Stay true to yourself. Stay true to who you are. Um, I mentioned to you here a few minutes ago that I'm doing what I set out to do, which was to help people. I never imagined it would be where I am and doing it the way I'm doing it today, but it's where I started, and so I'm true to that, to what I set out to do, 30 something years ago. Um, and just appreciate life. Just we are in a tough place right now. But we will get through this, and just appreciate the fact that we get to take a deep breath every day and appreciate every breath you take, because there are a lot of people who don't get that.
Thank you for joining us today. I hope you found something in today's podcast that inspires you along your own life path, because sometimes a bump in the road is actually a portal into a more conscious and meaningful life. Bump in the Road is a production of Cancer Road Trip. Subscribe to the podcast, follow us on social media at Cancer Road Trip, and you can learn more at www.cancerroadtrip.com. Until next time, be safe and be well.